At one point when we were assessing on quality alone, was number one. And I think if that's how you were assessing it, I think that's true. I think a lot of us feel that it is the highest quality drama New Zealand's ever made. But that was one where it became clear that it had limitations.
Talofa lava, I'm Madeleine Chapman, editor of the Spinoff. Welcome to Behind the Story, where I go behind the scenes of a big article on the Spinoff from the week. If you want a weekly rundown of some of the best reads from the Spinoff every Saturday, make sure you sign up to the weekend newsletter. Today I'm talking to senior writer Alex Casey. Alex has spent the past couple of months deep in local television, leading one of our most ambitious projects to date, the Spinoff Top 100 NZ TV shows of the 21st century. Every day this week we've counted down 20 of those shows, each given its time in the sun as a crucial piece in our cultural puzzle. On Friday we released the final 20, crowning a winner and drawing to a close more than 30,000 words published on New Zealand television in 1 week. Here's Alex Casey on Behind the Story. Kia ora, Alex. Thanks for being on the show.
Oh, kia ora, Mad. Always a pleasure to be here. I'm very excited to talk about this because we haven't actually really talked about this whole thing yet. There's been so many frantic messages back and forth, but no big conversation.
We've had conversations over the months about how we might do what has been a very ambitious project for the Spinoff, which is the Top 100 NZ TV shows of the 21st century. A real succinct title that we genuinely could not get any shorter, but it feels extremely natural for the Spinoff to be putting out a mammoth list like this. It's kind of an overlap of all of our interests, essentially. How long have you and Tara Ward, our delightful staff writer, been working on this?
Well, I think, when did it first the idea float to the surface? Because I believe it came from you being frustrated when you wanted to declare After the Party as the best drama New Zealand's ever made, not being able to access just a big, chunky listicle. And that was last year, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was last, I want to say October, and I had watched After the Party, and it was the first, honestly, not even local, just the first TV show in quite a while, probably there in Succession's final season, where I had genuinely tuned in every week the day it was released to watch it and had been holding out for new episodes. You know, as I like to be, very just making declarations out of nothing. I was like, this has got to be the best drama we've ever made. And I think Toby Manhire immediately went, well, that's a big call. And then I said, okay, well, can you name a different one then? And there was just sort of this silence, and it wasn't that people were like, oh, wow, you're correct. It was more just someone was like, well, I don't just have them on top of my head, but when we were searching New Zealand dramas or something, it was just all over the place. There wasn't really anywhere to go, a local IMDb or something to just go, I just want to see all of the shows that would qualify for this crown of New Zealand's best drama. And so then I was like, well, if anyone's going to make that, it should be us. But we don't want it to be just a boring list. We want to go all in. And that's kind of where you came along. I think you talked about having experts and other people. So could you sort of walk us through the judging panel essentially for this? Because this wasn't just one person going, I declare this to be 1 to 100.
No, not at all. Well, first of all, there was the entirety of the Spinoff staff, weighed in. We did a very gorgeous survey. Tara and I I found the first document we made was at the very start of August, when we first started actually we're putting pen to paper on this, and we put together a long list. First of all, we were going to look at TV shows of all time. But then we quickly realized, like, that's crazy. We're going to have to watch, like, Gliding On and all sorts of, like, I don't know. No, I'm sure Gliding On's great. I've just never seen it. And we just didn't have time or archive to kind of support that. So we were like, okay, let's look at the 21st century so far. It's, 25 years nearly, quarter century. So we started pulling together a long list, which I think probably had in total close to like 300 shows on it. There was a lot to do. And then so it was like, okay, how do we first start whittling this down? So that was where we just decided to get rid of giant chunks of our television history, which feels brutal, but was necessary. We decided to rule out current affairs pretty early on, which was controversial. But we also just kind of felt that it gets really hard to compare different news products in this kind of way, particularly when, there's different news products that service different communities and things like that. And it just feels like news has been through enough this year. Like the last thing they need is the Spinoff being like, and you are better than this one. So we took current affairs off the table and we took off like international reality formats. We decided we wanted it to be like homegrown ideas only, even if those ideas were extremely brazenly ripping off RuPaul's Drag Race, for example. So that knocked out huge chunks of it. And then we put together this big survey, which we put to the Spinoff staff, first of all, to each kind of rank their top 20 from each decade. And from that, we got a long list. And then we brought in an expert panel. So it was very important that we had checks and balances in place there. Although we are a pop culture obsessed website, we have limitations in terms of age, in terms of just interests and general genres we gravitate to. I mean, I'm pretty pleased with the quartet. There was two kind of seasoned veteran TV reviewers. We've got Diana Witchell, who's written for The Listener for 36 years, reviewing television in New Zealand. Chris Schultz, former Spinoff staffer, who I think is 20 years writing across entertainment in New Zealand. And then to kind of round out the more like genre-y interests, I brought in Erin Harrington, who, disclaimer, is a friend of mine here in Christchurch, but she's also a kind of screen academic, has written many papers about Wellington Paranormal, and particularly like horror is her thing. So she's really good on like the horror anthologies, which New Zealand has made a lot of, interestingly. And then Daniel Taipua, who has contributed to the Spinoff for a long time, has an amazing knowledge of genre in New Zealand, and particularly how it intersects with like Māori identity. He's done a lot of work he did a project called Aotearoa Futurism, which I thought was really awesome, looking at sci-fi and kind of indigeneity. So I thought all of those powers combined, plus the 18 or so spin-off drongos, we're probably going to catch most things, So our experts went through the same process. We kind of got a very loose 100. And then it was about really looking at each show pretty closely and having a lot of conversations.
A lot of conversations. I think everyone, you work in Christchurch, but you happen to be up in the office for a couple of days in this process, and I could hear you having what felt like the same conversation about 5 times as different people entered the office and decided to share their thoughts on whether current affairs should be disqualified or not.
Yeah, it was like, I'd say it was aggressive in nature, borderline HR issues, the way that people were coming at me. But that's also what I wanted. I wanted robust conversation. And I know we've probably made some mistakes in this list, or like there are things that aren't perfect. And there are people who have been messaging me saying, you forgot blah, 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 and this and this. And that's kind of the point as well. I think we were quite paralyzed with fear for a while about getting stuff wrong, but it's also like, we got to try, So I welcomed all that conversation. I think there was a lot of heat and passion around Campbell Live in particular, but also the kind of current affairs question was, where do you draw the line? What's fair go in the scheme of things? Where does Crowd Goes Wild sit in that world? And then if you take out Crowd Goes Wild, where does Sports Cafe sit? And it became this just endless debate, which is still unresolved in many corners. But yeah, there was a lot of passion for that. There was a lot of like debate about backbenchers, whether backbenchers should qualify. Ultimately, I think backbenchers was benched, ironically.
I think
right
you can probably tell from the the tenor of those two shows who may have raised these concerns in the office.
I'll never reveal.
There were not
sources.
so many concerns for the international reality TV, although there were.
No, there
but
were.
not as vocal, perhaps. But
yeah,
I will say some of these concerns will be voiced if you are in Auckland next week, assuming that you are listening to this episode before Halloween. There will be a live event that you are hosting at Q Theatre. I'm now just trying to pluck the details off out of nowhere, but Q Theatre on the evening of Halloween. Yes.
Very scary.
There is an invite if you are coming along, which I would encourage you all to buy tickets, to dress up as your favourite TV character. And that was actually, it sounds a bit glib, but that was part of the judging criteria, wasn't it, for this top 100?
It did come into play sometimes where it was like, that's a real easy gauge of a show's legacy or cut through or, defining characters is, could you dress up as it? Have people dressed up as it? If you saw someone dressed up as this character, would you know who they were? But yes, our event, do come along, Halloween. We're going to be basically making our case for the shows that either didn't make the list or maybe weren't up as high as they should have been. So I'm hosting it, but there's also Stuart Soman-Lund from the Spinoff, Lyric by Woody Smith from the Spinoff, and television stars Rhiannon McCall and Kura Forrester. So we'll all be getting up there and making our case for our favourite forgotten New Zealand TV gem. And it's going to be really fun, I think. I am dressing up. I do not know if anybody else on earth is dressing up at this point.
I will be dressing up.
Yes.
So there will be at least one hard to determine costume floating around. People might just think that's how I dress, which in terms of the judging criteria, I know there were obviously, some aggressive thoughts shared in the Spinoff office, but did you find that it all reasonably fell into place in terms of the surveys that were filled out and your panel?
The survey revealed an enormous recency bias. I would say that. And that might also be reflective of just like certain ages and generations. But I think it's also just no one can remember anything anymore, and it's easier to think about something from last year. But yeah, the criteria was pretty wide ranging. As you'll see in the small print, we always talk about significance of a show. It's not always necessarily about quality or critical acclaim, although that did factor into it. But we looked at a range of things, including representation, or if it was particularly ambitious or innovative, was it interesting talent incubator for a certain generation of people? Yeah, there was lots of different considerations. And it was actually when I started to get people's writing arriving that we had a real big shift of the list then, when we started to see how people were arguing, and we realized that it was actually as much about the era and the moment that the show arrived and what it represented at that time in New Zealand than it was the quality of the show. So yeah, there were some pretty big shifts made at that point, actually, I would say.
I mean, I will say I got sent I think you said not quite locked off, but basically this is what the list will be, not that long ago. And when I just went and had a look back at the top 20, the top 5 had changed.
Yeah.
And I was like, I had thought, and it had changed already before it got sent to me, and then it changed again. And I think we can say that it has come out now. So I guess spoilers if you have not read all 5 installments yet. But we have at number 3, the aforementioned After the Party. That felt, can we say?
Can we say what? Can we say?
That at one point it was number 1?
At one point when we were assessing on quality alone, or I think where people had come to the project thinking about quality and critical acclaim, After the Party was number 1. And I think if that's how you were assessing it, I think that's true. I think a lot of us feel that it is the highest quality drama New Zealand's ever made. But that was one where it became clear that it had limitations, based on just the nature of the show, but also its cultural representation, its cut through, its longevity and legacy, those two things started to play in really massively towards the end, those particularly longevity and legacy, which is unfair because there are a lot of shows that were cut too short. You know, quite a lot of the blurbs that I got in ended with bring it back or like not too soon for season 2. But the top 10 really did start to shake out pretty fast once we kind of really knew what we were looking at. And the top 10 really are like institutions. After the Party is a little bit of a different beast entirely. But yeah, it just became very clear to me suddenly, and Tara and a few other people that I've been having frantic calls with, that, oh no, there are other shows that are more significant in the broader sense than that.
And I think the real test will be if in 5 or 10 years you were going to do another list that incorporated the next 10 years, and After the Party still felt like a top 5. You know, like it was, it had stuck around, it had gotten extra waves or something, then obviously that would change things. But yeah, I mean, I wrote the blurb. I loved that show, but I also, bronze medal felt like a good spot for just an excellently executed, but potentially not quite legacy leader show.
It doesn't, it doesn't quite like define New Zealand, you know, in the same way as I think second and first do. But I will say, all top three shows, Robin Malcolm vehicles.
I know. I mean, this is a real Robin Malcolm appreciation post. So number 2, which is, I think a lot of people would have picked this for number 1, is just if somebody said, what's the best New Zealand TV show, they would go, Outrageous Fortune. Mm-hmm. Did you have, also at one point was in the number 1 slot?
Probably, yeah. They've all been shifting around. Did
you have much debate or disagreement about that not being number 1?
It was always right up there. Again, I think it's kind of almost happened in the reverse order. Is once we realised the true number 1, nothing else made sense. You know, like Outrageous Fortune is genuinely iconic. Obviously, it's the only show to ever have its own spin-off of 5 series. It had its own exhibition at the Auckland Museum for a long time. We could walk through the sets. You know, it basically had like a mini Outrageous Fortune Disneyland. It's undeniably iconic, but is it as significant as Shortland Street?
Yes, so spoiler, number 1, I was going to do a big reveal.
Sorry.
Number 1 is, of course, the most recognised and would be the most watched show in New Zealand history, Shortland Street. This feels, I will say this, even though people got really mad, this does feel like the salt and vinegar chip of number 1, which people got very mad at, saying it's too obvious, it's too common. It plays 5 nights a week. It's, you know, that sort of thing. But as you said, Tara writes an extremely persuasive pitch for it to be number 1. And even just the little, like, where you put the dates of when the show aired, I'm going to forget the date, 1992, and then blank, because it's still going. So obviously did not launch in the 21st century, but has been airing for every single week pretty much of the 21st century. When did you realise, of course it's Shortland Street?
I think it wasn't that long ago, to be honest. Again, it was when I started to read everyone's arguments and I've started to really feel a lot of like emotion around people's writing and thinking about the shows that have really like lived with us, because I think this is as much about the kind of experience of living or growing up in New Zealand as it is about television. You know, television is so personal and it's tied to so much about your memories and your upbringing. Shortland Street obviously plays a huge part in that for a lot of people. But it was also really looking at our criteria, writing everything down when I wrote the introduction piece, which, you know, as we all know, those pieces come really late in the process. And I wrote down all the criteria in terms of all those things I mentioned, like talkability, controversy, innovation, ambition, talent incubation, longevity, legacy. Whichever way you cut it, Shortland Street was number one.
Yeah.
And I liked that it was kind of, like you say, it's kind of an obvious choice, but I think to many will also be a total surprise. Lots of people have sort of forgotten about Shortland Street. It's also coming at a time where Shortland Street is in a little bit of trouble, as lots of things on television are. You know, next year it's going down to 3 nights a week. It's had to get government support. And so I also kind of liked that it was a bit of a moment to hero that show and look back at its enormous influence on New Zealand.
I think that's also, I mean, you know, we love to crown a winner and things like that, but you also really didn't want the word ranking in this because you said, well, even something that's 100 that's not the worst. That's 100 it's just great to be on the list. And the whole purpose of the list is that original thing that we were talking about, which is to get people to be able to see just the sheer sort of depth and breadth of television that we've made in New Zealand. Because I think, you know, for a while there, I think maybe we were both sort of going, is there enough for 100? Like 100's a nice number. Like we'd love to do 100, but is there even enough to fill in the list? And obviously there was more than enough. And I think a lot of people have noticed shows that they go, either I forgot this existed, or I never knew that we had a political satire comedy show made in New Zealand. So I've certainly got lots on my fun watch list, which you can do on the website. Were there any shows in particular that you had either not heard of or not seen a second of and have sort of gone, oh my gosh, this is right up my alley?
Yeah, the biggest revelation for me was The Pretender, which was a mid-2000s, kind of political mockumentary, which had completely dropped off the list entirely. No one had even clicked, not a soul had clicked that show anywhere in the survey process. But God bless him, my partner Joe was like, I think you need to look at The Pretender, and I think you should watch it. I remember it being good. And I mean, again, this is a limitation with so many of these shows. There is only one episode of it available to watch online. But I kind of settled in one night. I've never used New Zealand on screen as much as I have in the past few weeks. It's really good. Quite an amazing treasure trove. And I watched The Pretender and I was laughing. I was laughing and I wasn't feeling that really scary feeling that I had when returning to a lot of 2000s comedies, which was like, I can't wait for these un-PC jokes that are going to arrive like a hammer within like 5 seconds. It's a really just kind of assured mockumentary. Obviously, this is kind of off the back of The Office and everything of the early 2000s, so it sort of understands the genre. But it's just genuinely funny. And the guy at the centre of it, the kind of hapless politician who's leading this party, the second season of it came during the 2008 election, and he actually ended up penning a parody political blog for the Herald. And there are some pretty outrageous lines in those blogs, I will say, but it's also pretty funny. And I was like, oh, that was a really cool, kind of ambitious, interesting, low budget, but assured entry that just I never would have looked at, had it not been for this project. Yeah, there was heaps like that. And it's really sad when you're like, oh, I'd love to see more, but where?
Yeah, I think ultimately, and we've pitched it as this as well, if you've seen any of our kind of promos of the Top 100, it has been very much a week-long celebration of New Zealand television, and I think that is absolutely what it is. On Saturday this weekend, we will be running the full list, which, do you have a word count on that full list?
It's getting, I think it's 30,000. I mean, how long is a book?
30,000. 30,000 is a young adult book.
Yeah.
Like a small young adult book. We will probably break the website. That will be the longest post ever published on the spinoff.co.nz, but it will be the full top 100 with all the blurbs. And if you have been playing along and ticking for your watch list, which I do invite you to do, I'm so disappointed in myself how few I've been able to actually tick. I think it will go up with the final one, but they do carry over into the final one. So when you open up the 100, you'll see all of them together, and you can settle in for a probably 2-hour read of the best television in New Zealand this century. Thank you so much, Alex Casey, for being on Behind the Story. And just another reminder, the Top 100 television event, Live Spectacular, hosted by Alex Casey, will be at Q Theatre on October 31st, which is Halloween in Auckland. So head along to thespinoff.co.nz/tickets to secure your tickets and dress as your favourite TV character. There will be prizes, which Alex and I plan to win for best costume. That was Alex Casey on Behind the Story. I'll be back next week with another spin-off writer and another spin-off yarn. Thanks for listening.